Welcome to Understanding the Bible. This is episode 50, Heroes, Benaiah. So this is the second one in a series on heroes. Last one we did Shiphrah and Puah, which were midwives to the Hebrews while they were slaves in Egypt, and how these two women defied the ruler of Egypt, broke the laws of the country to save the children of Israel. And this time we're going to go into my favorite, which is Benaiah. Now, I'd always said if I had had a son that I wanted to name him Benaiah. Of course, that would be a horrible name in these modern days for kids, so I would have done it Ben. But this guy is really cool. So I can't wait to tell you some of these stories. There's only 2 stories about him. 3, I guess, that I could find in the Bible. But it's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get started. King David had what was called his personal bodyguard, or in the Bible is called his mighty men. And these were basically special forces for King David. And there's tons of stories in 2 Samuel. You really have to kind of humanize it a little bit because, when it says, oh, he killed 100 men, you got to think about it a little bit about what the details of that were. These guys were tough, like the Rambos of their time, and real literal people who were so skilled in combat, martial arts, hand-to-hand, swords, all the stuff that they had. One guy, Benaiah, was particularly skilled with a staff. So when you think of these things, these men and these stories in the Bible, it's not like you see in the movies always. I'm not saying that these were superheroes, but when you're attacked on a battlefield, 4 or 5 guys at most can attack you. And if you're in a swarm of men, it's not like they can shoot arrows up at a distance and hit you. So when it's hand-to-hand combat, which is what most of it was back in those days, you're fighting several men at a time and running and jumping and turning and ducking and weaving and attacking more men at every turn. And just the physical capability of that, if you've ever run an obstacle course, it's exhausting. And to be able to take on more than a dozen men is nowadays almost impossible. People just don't train for that. And that's why I said these are like the special forces, guys that actually could do something like that. And some of them were sneaky, but for the most part, they weren't. It wasn't spying and sneaking in and just, slitting somebody's throat. It was actual in the midst of combat type of thing. So we'll get into some of these stories, but for today, it's just Benaiah. Now, King David, he had over 600 men, just so you get an idea of what his army was like. This was when he was anointed king, but before taking the throne. So King Saul was the king of Israel, and God had anointed King David and said, hey, you're going to take the throne. But David knew that his time was not yet, and he did not want to kill another one of God's anointed, King Saul, so he just stayed away. Well, King Saul was jealous and hated him after killing Goliath and all the songs they sang about him, so King Saul hunted him with his army and tried to kill him. Well, David had over 600 men that followed him, and he lived in caves and ran across the countryside and hid. And at times there were battles, but he tried to stay away from fighting because he didn't want to kill his fellow Israelites. So, by the way, side note here, a lot of the stories were when they were in caves. And if you got 600 men in caves, I guarantee you that some of them are going to be scratching pictures on the walls. People wonder where cave drawings came from. Well, 3,000 years ago, hundreds of men lived in caves all over that region. So it's kind of a no-brainer if you ask me. But 1 Samuel 25:13 tells you how many men it had. It said, and David said unto his men, gird ye on every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. So 200 stayed back at the camp to guard their stuff, and 400 went out. So that's why I said he had over 600 men. Of those 600 men, 37 of these were his mighty men. 2 Samuel 23, verse 39. It lists those 37 men. Now, it states 30, but it lists 37. And then there's some different names, about a dozen or so in First Chronicles. And it's very simple if you do a little bit of common sense on that. If he's got a 30-man personal bodyguard, his mighty men, and you go into war and one of them dies, you name a new guy to be part of that bodyguard. You've got to replenish that staff, right? And so now he's got 31 names. Well, it seems pretty simple that you could have lost 7 men, and so he kept adding whenever he lost men. So that could be why there's 37 names, and then why there's different names. You know, maybe someone retires or is given a job as a general or something later on, and so he replaces that personal bodyguard with a new guy. So that's why you have different names and different numbers, but it's always referred to as the 30 men in 1 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, or 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles. Now, what are the capabilities of these 37 men? I just want to read 2 verses here. 2 Samuel 23:18. And Abishai, and Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief among 3. And he lifted up his spear against 300 and slew them, and had the name among 3. Was he not the most honorable of 3? Therefore he was their captain, howbeit he attained not unto the first 3. So how tough were these mighty men that he was not as good as the 3 best? And yet he lifted up a spear against 300 men and killed them all. One guy with a spear killed 300 men. That's insane to comprehend that. I don't know how long you have to be fighting, hours and hours, maybe a day or two, to be able to fight 300 men and kill them all, but with just a spear. Now, that's not to say in combat he didn't pick up another weapon and temporarily use it until it stuck in somebody and then it went back to his spear. I don't know. But when you think of hand-to-hand combat, this guy was a wizard with a spear. You know, you see those martial artists twirling their staff weapons and things like that, and being able to throw them in ungodly distances, and just crazy things, abilities that these people have who have trained their whole life for it. That's how I think of some of these guys. But even more so because they actually engaged in combat. And this guy was still not the best of the 37. There were 3 more that were tougher than him in combat, even though he could fight 300 men and best them all. So of those 37, 3 were the best. And they're referred to many times in these passages. And they were possibly confidants of the king, by his side day and night, like personal stick-to-you bodyguards that never leave your side, right? And then the other 30 were those that were rotated in and out, you know, to protect him, maybe guard the entrance to the cave he was in, or whatnot. I'm not sure how he organized all that, but he had 600 men. 37 of these were named. 30 of them were the best, called his mighty men. And 3 of those were the best of the 30. And one of those, this guy, Abishai, was the leader of those 3. And one person was the captain of all of his guards. So that's the captain of the 37. That's Benaiah. He was the leader of the personal bodyguards, very probably these 37 men. That's the only thing that makes sense to me, unless it means he was the leader over all of the 600. But it doesn't sound like that when you read this verse. In 2 Samuel 23, 22 and 23, it says, "These things did Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and had the name among 3 mighty men. He was more honorable than the 30, but he attained not to the first 3. And David set him over his guard." So Benaiah was more honorable than all of his mighty men, but he did not attain unto the first 3. That means his prowess, his strength, his ability in combat was not as good as the first 3. But David set him over his guard. Now later, when David ruled the kingdom, Benaiah was appointed as a leader. 2 Samuel 8:18 and 2 Chronicles 20:23, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over both the Cherethites and the Pelethites. And here's what Benaiah did, and this is why I like him. This is the story of Benaiah, and you kind of have to read between the lines and think about what it means that this guy did. 2 Samuel 23, verse 20. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, who had done many acts, he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. He went down also and slew a lion in the midst of a pit in time of snow. And he slew an Egyptian, a goodly man, and the Egyptian had a spear in his hand. But he went down to him with a staff and plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and slew him with his own spear. These things did Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and had the name among 3 mighty men. He was more honorable than the 30, but he attained not to the first 3, and David set him over his guard. So let's look at this for a second. Benaiah, first it says he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. I have no idea what that means other than that they looked powerful and ferocious. So he tested himself against 2 great men, and he was able to kill them. Then he's walking along in the wintertime, in the time of snow, it said, and he saw a lion in a pit, and this dude thought, I'm going to test myself against an actual lion, not just a man. And so he takes off his cloak and drops his weapon, and he jumps down there and fights the lion barehanded. It's freaking crazy. And then the next thing he did was he slew an Egyptian. It says a goodly man. Now that's the word for appearance. And if you're talking from a warrior perspective, which this story is, he had the appearance of a good warrior. So I'm thinking like a bodybuilder type guy. He had big muscles, tall, broad-shouldered, strong, looked angry, looked scary type of thing. That would be what it means by a goodly man. So he slew the Egyptian by taking the spear from the Egyptian. So with his staff, he went down with the staff, plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and killed him with his own spear. Now you got to take that in context with he was more honorable than all the best men of King David's men. So he had honor when he did this. This is what I mean by reading between the lines. You see, Egypt had always been the enemy of Israel. Think back to how the nation of Israel started with Joseph and the 12 brothers and his mom and dad, and then they were down in Egypt and they became slaves, and then they reached a population of over like 2 million people, and the king slaughtered all of the newborn sons, and like the Egyptians were always their enemy. And as they left, remember the parting of the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army was in there, and then God closed the Red Sea over the army and killed the entire army of the Egyptians, right? Well, ever since then, the Egyptians had been against the Jews, which makes sense. So here's this guy traveling through the land, probably some sort of Egyptian soldier, maybe a messenger or a spy, I don't know. But Benaiah sees him and again decides to test himself against this tough, goodly appearance looking man, warrior with a spear, and he just goes down there without a weapon, just a staff, and bests the guy. To me, that's reminiscent of the Wild West and the gunslingers, right? But this guy did it with honor. He didn't shoot the guy in the back. He didn't shoot an arrow at him from out in the forest. He went down to him and fought him hand to hand honorably. So if you think of the Wild West, these guys, not the gunfighters that would bump into someone in a bar and draw their gun and kill them just so that they could say they killed, 12 people. But one of those gunfighters that would challenge someone who was of equal strength to meet me out in the street at noon. And then at noon, they'd go and walk 10 paces or 100 paces or whatever it was and turn around and draw and shoot at each other. To me, that's the type of tough, manly combat skill where they know one of them's going to die, but for some reason they decide they just have to test each other to see who's the best. For a man to have honor, it had to have been like that. He didn't just attack the guy for no reason, or it would not be honorable, right? So that's what I think of these situations. This is how I think of this stuff when I read the Old Testament, and you got to think about the time period. The fact that their people were enemies. He could have avoided the guy, but he decided not to. He approached him, challenged him to combat, and they fought, and he won. He took the guy's own weapon and killed him with his own weapon. So this is the type of courage, the type of skill, the type of craziness that I honor and admire. And the fact that he was more honorable than the 30 is what makes this guy important. Benaiah did crazy things. He liked to test his own limits, but always with honor. Clearly, he was leadership material, even though he was not as tough as a fighter as the first 3. So that's something to remember, is David picked his best fighters, those 3, to protect him, and his most honorable man to lead the others. Benaiah was a good guy, a little bit crazy maybe. Who wants to jump down in the snow pit, in a pit in the middle of the wintertime and fight a lion just because? This guy was constantly just testing his limits and his skill and his ability to do what? Combat. To kill. It's very interesting. Our God understands death. Now, there's a whole nother lesson there, but it is not wrong to be a warrior. It is not wrong to be skilled in fighting. It's just something to consider. But thanks for listening, guys. And until next time, may God bless you all. Hey, thanks for listening. I really appreciate all of you who have supported me. And if you have the ability, if you have an extra $5 you can support me with, I would really appreciate that to help this podcast to continue. Just go to Spotify and click on the support this podcast button with the little $ there. And there's an option to do a monthly support of $1 or $5 or $10. But I do need the money. We all do these days. And to keep this podcast going, I'm never going to charge for it. Okay. That's why I do the ads, but your gift definitely helps. So thank you for supporting me. Thank you for listening. And please share this podcast with others. Whatever social media you have, or when you're talking to somebody and something comes up, share the podcast. Get it out there. Let people know. The ultimate goal of this podcast is, yes, I want people to become Christians, but I want other believers to be discipled, to know the Bible, to understand the Bible, and to be willing to be warriors. That's why I do this. We need good fighters. And I'm talking physically, spiritually, and prayerfully in every way. We need people who have the guts, the willingness to stand up and fight the evil in this world. And it takes all kinds, even joining the military if you feel that's your calling. The point is, share the podcast. People need to be encouraged to stand up for what is right. People need to be encouraged to understand that our God is a man of war. Exodus 15:3. Our God is a man of war. He fights for what is right. He fights for justice. He fights to destroy evil. And King David was a man after God's own heart. And they sang songs about King David, how he has slain his 10,000s. I don't know if you remember that, after killing Goliath, the giant. And King David understood the value of warriors, and he picked 30 men to be his personal bodyguard. Something to think about, guys. I really appreciate you listening. Thank you. Please share, and definitely share the gospel at every opportunity. I don't know what else to say, guys. Jesus loves you, and I appreciate you. So until next time, may God bless you all.